Hello, everybody. Welcome. It is perhaps May 3rd. Time has been a little strange for me lately because I've been laid up. After having a salad a couple days ago, my body freaked out. So I've mostly been in bed and doing a whole bunch of sweating. I'm not sure what I have in mind to share today. There's no organized colloquium, but it's been a little while since I made a recording, so I thought I'd have a go at it and just see where it goes. You know, a lot of our experience is structured by a broad array of expectations that are instilled in us by the cultures we grow up in and the places where we live. And we should be willing to imagine that what it would mean to be human would be radically different if we were growing up in a different context. Yes, the calla lilies and their predilection to attract, at least around here, crab spiders, which I love. They're really awesome. There's a male. I can see a male in this one. I was speaking with a friend and she was talking about her daughter's education in Italy and how radically different it is from what would happen to her here. And notice I say happen to her because there's a huge difference between being subjected to something that effectively ruins your mind and perhaps your heart, and being drawn into a rich developmental conversation that nourishes and supports your development. When she brought her daughter to Italy, the educational system there, they were doing things when she was 10 and 11 that we wouldn't do here, if ever, until college. And I've heard this story so many times, before. Although it's possible to acquire a well-rounded and rich education in the United States, it's profoundly difficult and or expensive. And if there's one thing I want to be absolutely clear about, it's that in nations as sophisticated and wealthy as ours, there are at least two things for which there should be no charge whatsoever, and those are education and healthcare. If we can afford $23 trillion to support the military, we could take one of those trillions and educate our people and their children. And we could take another of those trillions and give them healthcare that was actually profound, advanced, sophisticated, and effective. In any country where healthcare is a business, you have a fundamental conflict of interest, and the same is true of education. If people want to argue like we should all pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, my argument is go make a country where you do that and leave us alone. Right? Just get the hell out of here. I remember I often have complex conversations with cabbies. Cab drivers are a particularly interesting kind of human, and I would argue that they were much more interesting before the advent of GPS and electronic navigation, because they had to have a map. Their minds were maps. And I had a couple of close friends who were cabbies in the 90s. One of them was a poet. I wonder if I can recall his name. It's been so long since I thought of him. But what a brilliant and sensitive human being he was. Ken Wainio was his name. And I think I published one of his stories in my magazine Cyanosis. Oh, by the way, if any of you want a copy of that magazine, you can make a comment and you can have a copy for about $10. It's more of a book. It's a large book rather than a magazine. In the 90s, I was publishing this art and literary journal because I saw the Republicans going after arts and education with the obvious agenda of creating a situation where the general American populace was ignorant enough to just be directly manipulable by propaganda, which you can see is an agenda which has largely, if not completely, succeeded a very short time later. Tragically. But I remember not too long ago, I was in a cab with a driver from Pakistan, and he was talking about their educational system and the education that he received there, and what happened when he came to the United States in an attempt to continue it. And basically, when he was like 10, 8, 9, 10, they were teaching the children advanced calculus, right? Whereas here, and when he came here, he had to go through some of the, in order to get a degree, he had to go through some of the American education stuff for which he had no records in the US. And the education that he received at 8, 9, or 10 in Pakistan was superior to the understanding of the teacher at the college he was going to here, to the degree that he was constantly correcting the teacher. I myself left school when I was 12. And I recall a situation last week where I was on Facebook, unfortunately, probably for everyone, and there was a picture meme of some guy, and it said something to the effect of, we've gone from teaching Latin and Greek in high school to teaching remedial English in college. And some parafeministic females were yelling about the fact that, this guy was some kind of right-wing idiot and we shouldn't listen to him. And I said, I don't think it's a good idea to dismiss the truth based on your evaluation of someone's character. That's a formal example of the ad-hominem rhetorical fallacy, which is to fail to address the subject and to instead concern yourself with character assault. And a number of women, some of them quite intelligent, piled onto my comment and just started, telling me what an idiot I am, and how the ad hominem fallacy doesn't even matter. It's not really a thing. And I was like, yeah, if we're going to start dismissing knowledge and truth based on the character of someone who says something, you can it's the end of rational intelligence. It's over with. It's not untrue that they were making accusations of patriarchy and colonialism and blah blah. The common left wing, these days largely bullshit arguments. And what I mean by bullshit is, it's not bullshit that there's been patriarchy. It's not bullshit that that's caused harm. It's not bullshit that there's been colonialism all over the place, and the catastrophic devastation of cultures and peoples and women and children and men and all these things. All of that's true. But it's possible to weaponize this concern into something that makes us dumber every time we make a move. And that's what I mean by bullshit. The weaponization of the possibility of virtue. We should be very cautious about prosecutorial historicity. Because once we become very concerned with prosecution and indictment, most of our intelligence is going to be subject to the costs of those behaviors. And those costs are not sustainable. You have to be really careful with what you do with a mind and what you choose to do with it. Suspicion, indictment, prosecution, they maybe have their place in certain circumstances, but if that becomes the primary intellectual agenda, it's over for human intelligence. The whole prospect of insight or intelligence collapses into war mind, righteous indignation. I was very surprised to see a couple of women who were clearly quite articulate and intelligent and well-read dismissing the ad hominem argument that I made, which was not only valid, apparently there's no such thing as facts anymore. And I get the whole idea that facts are relative. I study semantics. I'm not an idiot. In fact, I realized that facts are relative a long time ago, more than 20 years ago. But there are domains in which we must rely on, we've got to have a foundation of some kind that is trustworthy. And if we're going to decide that there are no facts, that we all just get to make up whatever facts we like, I don't think anyone is capable of understanding the cascade of social, intellectual, ecological, and relational catastrophes that therefrom will ensue, for certain. The idea that nothing is true simply because bad men said it, or nothing is true because truth is a patriarchal con game, a colonial war game, you know, there's a tiny bit of, there's a seed. Wow, this guy's a genius. There's this guy who paints here, and the spirit of his art is really profound. Yeah, that stuff's fucking lethally toxic. So yeah, I was very surprised, because here's the problem. Let me go back to what this man may have actually said, right? We're just talking about a meme here, but they're trying to do a character attack on a guy who's saying something that's so true and important. What the hell is the goal, right? We're going to dismiss what he said because we think he was a bad man, or an avatar of the patriarchy or the right. Jesus. So here's the actual problem. I left school when I was 12. I'm a self-educated person. The technical term is autodidact, and I'm precociously self-educating. Many of my closest friends are similar. And some of them are at or above my own par. What shall I do with this lady? She'll get crushed if she stays here, so I guess I gotta try to move her. Let's see what's going on here. Give me a moment. Come on, sweetness. Yeah, just climb on the leaf. You're okay. I want to get you off the path. Because I don't... That's it. Good girl. Good girl. That was a female bumblebee. And let me be really blunt about one thing. That bumblebee is female. The gender that can reproduce, let's be clear. It's not a joke, it's not a concept. It's a physical situation. In any case, I'm a self-educated person. Briefly, I attended college for the first time when I was 24. I took a couple of classes, one class in music theory. The teacher was horrible and hated teaching the class. One poetics class, also really bad teacher. And I took a class, English 1A, which was essay writing. And the teacher of that class at Santa Rosa Junior College was a man named Richard Speaks, a relatively brilliant poet in his own right, a fairly radical teacher, very 60s, Zen in the art of motorcycle maintenance kind of guy, regularly flirted with female students, married one of them who was probably 25 years his junior, targeted for a lot of attacks on his, romantic acumen. And, occasionally I leveled a little criticism at him. I wouldn't say that he was a chauvinist. I think he was fascinated and intrigued by women. He was an older guy, rode a motorcycle, rolled his own cigarettes. He was a really good teacher. He was more like a rock star than an English professor. And I took a class with him, and he tried to convince me to become a teacher because he said that he saw in me the gift that would grow into something really amazing. But at the time, I couldn't understand undertaking a project that would require 5 years to complete. I wasn't even sure I would live 5 more years. And this is a problem with not just my generation, but the generations successive to mine, where we find it incredibly difficult to believe in anything resembling a future, and therefore we can neither plan nor develop one. This is tragic and appropriate.
It is what it is.
So, Speaks asked me to teach with him the next semester, and to teach the English 1A class. We were teaching Barry, what's his name, Crossing Open Ground, naturalist author. We were teaching Siddhartha and E.B. White, who, by the way, if you've never read any essays by E.B. White, you're missing out on something profoundly. I mean, all of them are geniuses. Also, Joan Didion. Oh my God. Yeah, she became one of my heroes and profoundly influenced my writing. In fact, many of my heroes are women. And when I say that, I want to again indicate I'm talking about the actually existing gender that reproduces. Right? And if you guys want to have, if anyone out there wants to have some kind of a fight with me over this, go ahead and raise your sword. I'll meet you on the battleground. We will go together to war. I'm not saying there are only 2 genders. I'm saying that biologically, in humans, fundamentally, there are 2 genders. Ideologically, different situation. And I don't know why I'm feeling so militant about this today, but the idea that someone might attack me and claim that I'm making shit up to believe in a single reproductive gender and then, kind of anything else, is a symptom of a catastrophic array of linguistic and conceptual distortions, ideological distortions. I have no problem with anyone who wants to be seen in a certain way. I have a huge problem with anyone who wants to police my language over that, or tell me that it's a law that there are 79 genders. Yeah, that's nonsensically ridiculous. It's a symptom of a breakdown in an aspect of human social relation and cognition that I think we should be particularly concerned with and vigilant in. Now look, my opinions aren't as fundamentalist as they sound here, but we're not yet having a conversation, right? I'm speaking ex cathedra. This is my recording. I'm saying what's on my mind. Totally willing to enter into meaningful, generative conversations about such topics with people who are more, when we are interested in learning together, that's very different from declaration. But for the moment, this isn't a conversation. I'm speaking. So, I agreed to teach the class with Richard, and he was like, look, dude, I really want you to have the experience of being in front of a classroom and teaching. I think you're made for this, and it'll go really well. So, here's what I'll do. We'll call you a reader. I'll get you a little bit of pay you can actually do some reading and grading of papers, and but what you'll really be doing is showing up for every class and co-teaching the class with me. And so I did that thing. And in fact, not while the class was going, but after the class had stopped, I ended up dating one of the girls in the class, who was, quite a bit younger than me. It's true, I did. Willow. She was awesome. So we had a class of about, we had 3 classes of approximately 30 people, ranging in age from 17 to 27, primarily white. There was one African American young man in that class. Primarily B to A students, high school graduates, B to A grade point average, 90 people, Americans, upper middle class white folk, in a fairly upper middle class city. I've said this before, but I'm going back to the meme, right, where we used to teach Latin and Greek in high school, and now we're teaching remedial English in college. Remedial English. Right? Think about the difference in cognitive sophistication between somebody who can learn and speak Latin and Greek and someone who cannot speak English, their only language. So, of the 90 students, approximately 5 of them were capable of forming a written sentence in English. 2 of them could compose a paragraph reliably. They are in junior college. They have graduated high school somehow. Right? They cannot write the single language that they mostly speak. That was in approximately 1994-5. Right? Who knows what is, I shrivel up inside to imagine what the situation is today. If it was that bad back then, and I had no idea that anything resembling this was even possible. Having been a reader my whole life and being somewhat hyperlexic, it never occurred to me that the people around me might be incapable of writing English. I was staggered. I knew there were problems with American education. I had no idea how catastrophically severe they were. It was mind-blowing to me. We didn't have time to teach them how to write sentences or paragraphs because we were trying to teach them how to write essays. And they were so catastrophically unprepared that effectively as teachers, our goal was impossible. We managed to do a little bit of it. So again, the women who attacked me on Facebook, with all due respect, which isn't much, they're attacking someone who's sounding an alarm bell about the future of their children, of their families, of their progeny. And they're attacking his character? Really? Like, what he's saying is so right and so important that there's no possibility of his character entering into the conversation at all. It's as if something in these people is offended by the possibility that they might have to take facts seriously. That they might have to attend, look, there are all kinds of people who I don't agree with or who propose perspectives that I dislike or don't agree with. If I were then to dismiss the entire oeuvre of their creative or intellectual output, the poverty would land in me, right? It would land in me, in my heart, in my mind. The idea that we should cancel or throw away the knowledge, the intelligence, the insight of people with whom we find some reason to feel uncomfortable. That's the death knell. That's the ringing of the bell of a kind of apocalypse in consciousness, awareness, intelligence, insight. If you wanted to ruin an entire generation of humans, just get them doing that. And I mean, if you let that monster in the door, I can't wait to see what comes after that. There's certain mistakes that we have to not ever make if the possibilities of our intelligence are going to survive. And one of the women just said, I fiercely disagree with you, when I explained what an ad-hominem attack is and means, and that, unfortunately for her opinion, what the quote said was a fact. We are teaching remedial English in college. We have been doing that in the United States for at least 20 years, probably more like 40. Which means we are catastrophically failing to educate our children. And if that's not interesting enough to get their attention, and if the fact that they have a character problem with someone who's saying that is more important, do you see the problem? Like, the wrong thing is getting emphasis here for sure, not maybe. I don't know anything about the guy. I don't care who the guy is. He was a right-wing asshole. Good for him. What he was saying was true and important. And, as Eric Weinstein often says, there are exactly 0 restaurants where I walked in the door and signed up for the entire menu. Yes, I'll have everything. Right? And it's similar with spiritual or intellectual or, any kind of thinker at all. All of the brilliant men and women who have been the mothers and fathers of my mind proposed things that were wrong, or things that I completely didn't agree with. Alfred Korzybski, one of the most important thinkers of the 20th century, largely ignored, was insane. He said that criminals, having ostensibly given up the right to participate in the human project, should be the subjects, should have their bodies taken away from them and be the subjects of scientific experimentation for the cause of bettering humanity. That is one of the most insane things I've ever heard in my life. Does that mean I should disabuse myself of the entire subject of non-Aristotelian logic, one of the most important features or forms of human cognition I've ever encountered? Fuck no. Of course, if he was a genius, he was also partly insane. And many geniuses are partly insane. Many of the geniuses we revere are partly insane. That doesn't entitle us to dismiss the incredible insight that they suffered and made sacrifices to bring to the experience of being human. Thankfully, I'm not particularly interested in ideological jousting on Facebook. But in this one case, I was willing to, pull my dagger and point out the ad-hominem problem. And I was shocked to see, one of the women who responded, who's a friend, a Facebook friend. Hi, sweetness. I love you. I think it's the scarf. Yeah. When I have my scarf tied to my purse strap, dogs often look at me weird and want to approach me, and I think it's because they've never seen that particular feature, and it's visually, it stands out visually. So, yeah, one of the women is a friend of mine on Facebook, and very intelligently attempted to explain why she also didn't agree with the ad hominem. I really have a hard time with people who don't agree with the rhetorical fallacies. Do they even understand them? These are the figures of speech that are not merely the catalog of sophistic methods for manipulating human thought, concern, values. Sophistry is a problem when we don't recognize it, because we can be manipulated by language. But the arts of rhetoric form essentially the foundations of the possibility of articulate linguistic communication. Not only should we not dismiss them, we should be teaching our children these things. And in, the privileged classes of Europe, primarily the males, yes, it's true, they were taught something called the trivium. And I think this was like rhetoric, geometry, and one other thing that I can't remember. It meant like the three important things. But one of them was rhetoric, and that's not an accident. People who are not educated in rhetorical sense and the capacity for complex rhetorical speech. Everyone loves Shakespeare, and part of the reason they love him is that Shakespeare, whoever that might have been, was a master of the tropes, of the rhetorical tropes. And that's part of what makes his work so profound, presuming that it was a male who wrote that stuff. And actually, I think there was another feature of Shakespeare that probably largely goes unnoticed except among scholars, which is that, is this a queen cell from a beehive? I don't know. No, I don't think so. Looks similar, but it isn't. Okay, let's see what's going on here. Shakespeare basically was a hypersystem of consciousness, extending over a number of brilliant actors, a specific theatrical milieu or array of milieus, and the intelligences common in the rhetorical and sophistic network of minds in which the audience and the societies participated or which they forged together. So that's not like a regular human at all. That's someone who's touching what I call the cognitium. That mind isn't merely human. And it's blatantly obvious that this is so. It's not dissimilar with other prodigies, people who rise up above the idea of the individual and the scope of an individual's intelligence into the sort of stratosphere of human cognition and concern in general, achieve a kind of superposition over the possibilities of an individual mind. It's blatantly obvious that many poets, Rilke, Rumi, others, whether or not they were conscious of this, they certainly practiced it. I would argue that Joan Didion is another example, as is Eva Braun, a philosopher of incredible intellectual breadth and depth. You know, I was raised by feminists. My mom was a feminist. I used to go to a National Organization of Women meetings. I'm not claiming that gives me any special privilege or cachet or gravitas, but the intellectuality of the 1970s feminists was some of the first actual intelligence in humans that I ever directly encountered. You better believe I have respect and reverence for that. Until and unless that fundamental intelligence for which I have respect and reverence becomes weaponized. At that point, I don't merely diverge, I oppose. There is a kind of respect and reverence that we extend to all beings and to all persons. When I see people and there is similarly a kind of respect and reverence that we extend to skillful people. And when I see something like the opposite of this, when I see people attack an entire gender, which is what is going on right now with the bear meme, effectively. And I'd like to decompose that a bit, but I'll hold off on that so that I can stay on topic for a minute. When I see a group, when I see the rise of sort of weaponized ideological invective, right? Character assault, the dehumanization of males, and there's no justification for that. None. Historically, we have lived under the aegis of various modes of patriarchy bad humans are bad humans regardless of their gender, and the fact that there are bad males does not pervade over the entire gender. The fact that there are bad people doesn't pervade over entire cohorts either. This urge to generalize wrongdoing for the sake of indictment is a disease that leads to catastrophic sequelae that none of us want. I mean, maybe some of us do want it. I don't know. Maybe there are people who actually want a devastating, unlivable future, forged by the appearance of virtue under the flag of virtue above a complex array of weapons that obliterate intelligence, insight, community, family, tradition, all these things. I guess I'm kind of ranting a little bit, but I find a lot of this upsetting. At the point when I began to become an adolescent, I was no longer allowed to attend the Now meetings, and I began to realize that the feminists were anti-male. Back then, I didn't really understand, though my mother had tried to explain to me that some of the women in the group were lesbians. I didn't really understand what that meant. They just didn't seem some of them didn't seem particularly feminine to me. And these days, one's not even supposed to say words like that. Like, what does, as if one's not supposed to suppose that there is a relatively intrinsic, not merely scripted aspect to the gender interiority and expression of human beings. And while I will agree that some degree of that is not wrong, right? It's not an entirely wrong idea. You can't throw the whole idea out the window just because there's gender scripting. And this is a very complex topic which I'm addressing rather cursorily at the moment. And for that, I apologize, but it's not really my goal to get into the politics of gender here. Rather, I'm trying to talk about a situation where what we might think of as left-wing intellectuals are attacking foundational principles that underlie the possibility of intellectual discourse, perception, perspective, and so forth. Anyone is welcome to think that the solidity of concrete isn't a fact, it's a patriarchal projection. Right? Well, trip and fall and you're going to find out that there's a fact right underneath you. So if you think there are no facts, or that facts are just a construct, you're wrong. You're just going to be wrong. In fact, if you think there are no facts, let's suppose someone just says something like, well, people just make up facts to manipulate other people. Okay, that does occasionally occur. That's not happening, but that doesn't, you have the same problem of the generalization of a portion of a curve to the entire curve. If you come and tell me there's really no such thing as facts, well then you've just undermined your own statement. Because what you are saying, in effect, is that it is a fact that there are no facts. You see the problem here? Truth in language and concept is real. It's not real the same way physical reality is real. It's conceptually real, it's linguistically real, and it's cognitively real. And it can also be relationally real. So there are actual facts. My friend Dr. K was talking to me last night and helping me to disambiguate my illness and figure out whether it was time for me to go to the emergency room or not. And quite frankly, if there was an emergency room for human intelligence, our culture should go directly there right now. Because this shit is failing. And part of the problem is that America is as I've said before, we're a petri dish for every kind of conceptual and linguistic psyop imaginable. We're just getting we're getting psyop injections 1,000 times per minute from 5,000 different, bad actors. I can't wait to see how our children are going to fare in a situation like that. We've got to create some kind of immunity for each other against that, and perhaps that's part of what I'm trying to do here. And maybe even to bolster my own immunity to some degree, because I have to try to understand how to cope with situations where people tell me, ad hominem attacks are things we should do, right? The ad hominem perspective, that's the right one. Enacting rhetorical fallacies is intelligence. That's visionary. That's the way of the future. It was so strange to see the very articulate woman objecting. And her argument was, I wish I could just state it. Maybe I could go find it and say it. What I'll probably try to do is later I'll put it in the comments just so that I don't have to depart right now from the recording. Also, it would take me a bit, and I don't want to lose my train of thought, even if my train of thought is not particularly coherent at the moment. So, what was my friend Dr. K saying? He was saying that he's reading a book with an argument between a neuroscientist and a mathematician, and the neuroscientist is trying to claim that mathematics has no privileged status among the languages. One of my raven friends is here with me. He's like a foot from me. I'm giving him peanut, which they really like. Now, this has been an ongoing conversation between Dr. K and I, although mostly we're on the same page. It goes back to so Dr. K is a vicious opponent of Wittgenstein and Heidegger, also of Jung. Dr. K claims that Jung was a Nazi, and we shouldn't listen to him. And by the way, Dr. K is committing the ad hominem fallacy there, because Heidegger was a Nazi and Jung was a Nazi. We should just, largely dismiss them, which of course I do not agree with. If Hitler himself had said intelligent things, I would take them up and not reject them simply because they came out of the mouth of a maniacal, meth-addicted tyrant. I don't care about the character when it comes to intelligence and insight. I don't care. Consider the source. Well, if it's food, maybe. If it's intelligence, not so much. I suppose I could invert my perspective and forge an argument where I I'd call it like the poisoned pool argument, right? You don't want fish from a poisoned pool, so you don't want intelligence from minds that are bad or evil. Okay, yeah, I could propose and pursue such a line. I'm disinclined to at the moment, but just be aware that I'm not an ideologue, and I'm happy to entertain perspectives that oppose my own, and if I weren't, I would be catastrophically incapable of learning. A friend of mine the other day on Facebook, a very close friend, said, "When was the last time you had a conversation with someone who disagreed with you? Like, when was the last time you entertained the perspective of someone with whom you disagreed?" Something like this. And for me, it's usually, the last time was usually today, maybe yesterday. I regularly, there's an old euphemism about being able to entertain perspectives alien to your own concern, belief, habit, and so forth, and how crucial that is to philosophical discovery and understanding and awareness and intelligence. And I agree. But let's start out, with an agreement that we're here to see better together, right? To help each other see better together. If we begin with that agreement, and that's our motivation and our goal, we're in pretty good shape, right? We're unlikely to get trapped or stuck in the weeds of our own bias, habit, etc. And those weeds are thick and sticky. I don't want to get stuck in those weeds. I don't trust my own bias. But that doesn't mean I don't trust anything I think either. Some of my biases have crucially important foundations that I'm disinclined to dispose of on a whim. On the other hand, my pet biases often are very blinding, but I need somebody intelligent enough to show me how the structure of my thought is failing me. And I have a great wingman, Ms. R. Yeah. That wingman really helps me, because Ms. R's mind is very different from mine and tends toward uncollapse, toward specificity, whereas even though I can do both, I tend to go toward specificity. And I'm very nervous about generalizations, right? Especially sloppy generalizations where malfeasance or malignance is generalized to an entire clade, as is happening with the bear meme, which I am interested in dissecting, but probably won't do here. I recall a not entirely dissimilar meme that I felt was valuable. It's important that we hear the voices of women and that we hear the concerns of women. Ms. R was telling me that for portions of her life, she felt completely unsafe being around people at all. And this constant sense of vulnerability and danger probably had a variety of anchors, but the primary one is blatantly obvious and has a lot to do with the danger of being a woman in a world dominated by men. And even us males know something of what that's like, because most of us have been subject to the viciousness of a man or a group of males, especially in our childhood, who bullied, beat, raped, denigrated, spat on, kicked us. Whereas, how many of us were subject to gang violence from females? Not none, but nearly none. In terms of boys, anyway. So look, I get it. I remember this meme where somebody asked women what they would do if how would it affect their life if there were a curfew for males, like a 6 p.m. curfew or something. And they said things like, I'd wear a dress, or I'd go for a walk. In other words, I'd feel okay doing ordinary human things. And I'd feel safe, right, doing ordinary human things. And I think that's real. I absolutely acknowledge that. We forget, unless we hear very directly, unless there's a context in which women can speak openly about their experience.
He's about to tell me the straight up
This is MLK. Martin Luther King.
Unless there's a context in which women can speak openly about their experience and what it feels like, we won't know, and our suppositions won't be sufficient. So I absolutely support that. But the generalization
the first thing is to show you
that happens where the character of my gender is disposed of or denigrated, that is... What the hell is that? That's like hate speech. That's genderist invective. The fact that men are more dangerous than women, probably true generally speaking, depends on the situation, not always true. There are many men who will lay down their lives for a woman they don't even know. Right now, right? Instantly. So the idea that, men are just bad, I'm not a friend to that idea. On the other hand, again, I do support, let me put it this way. Let's start a conversation where we mutually support each other and create a context where women are safe and free and healthy and happy in all our social contexts and beyond. Let's do that. Rather than just focusing on what's bad, wrong, and terrible about men, true though that may sometimes be, the wise move is to educate our children and each other and create a social and a relational context in which misbehavior is, immediately intervened in I'm going to pause here for a minute because there's something going on in the gardens that I do not entirely understand, and I'm going to have to walk through it. So I'll be back. You know, it's the same. The money we spend on war doesn't help us. The resources we spend on indictment and combat are far better spent on establishing a relational context and envelope in which we become better humans together. We become better beings together. We become better spirits together for each other. And we need to be really cautious, especially today, about divisive narratives. And I'm very concerned because I can see a kind of storm of little psyops of divisive narratives bubbling up in American anti-culture. I can't speak for how it is elsewhere, but that shit is pathologically hyper-contagious and extremely dangerous. It breeds factionation, and it breeds suspicion, and once you're suspicious, half your assets are missing. This is the problem with producing dialectics of indictment. And it hurts people it makes victims out of innocence, right? None of us chose, well, I don't know if that's actually true. It's not clear that we chose our incarnate genders. And, you know, I've spent much of my life very concerned about how I am seen as a man in the world by women. So much so that it's been nearly impossible for me to approach women for whom I had affection, because I'm so terrified of being seen as a bad person. And, you know, one could argue, oh, you know, that's actually a shadow of something that's a lie. You actually are a bad person secretly, and that's why you're so scared. Okay, great. I understand the psychological argument. I don't really think that's most of what's going on, if it's any of what's going on. It is profoundly challenging, and I respect and want to hear from women about these challenges that they experience and face. But it's also profoundly challenging to be a man, and it's even more challenging to be a sensitive man. Much more challenging. So why can't we create a context and a conversation in which we can supportively listen to and understand each other without indicting, without creating it without adding to a problem that's already blatantly obvious. And let's be really clear, much of this problem isn't a problem of men versus women. It's a problem of developmental contexts that are fundamentally toxic, media that is fundamentally toxic, the catastrophic miseducation of our children and each other by media. This really comes back to something resembling education. What is the developmental milieu in which we and our children develop. That's where the problem is. It's not men are bad or women are helpless, which of course was never true. Though, granted, the disproportionate physical force that men can usually table in comparison to women does create a problem in any civilization where the personhood, integrity, and spirit of the women isn't revered, isn't respected, or women are seen as objects. In case it isn't obvious, men are objectified too. It's just a different kind of objectification. We're objectified as, combatants, warriors, things like this. Now, I'm not sure that the terrain over which I've wandered today is all that valuable. I'm not even sure if I'll publish this recording, though I probably will. I'm not particularly proud of it, because in a way it's a little bit self-conflicted. I've been speaking against the idea of a mind that indicts, and I can see the irony here in that I am indicting a mind that indicts, right? I can go to the, I can jump one level up and see the problem. So I will acknowledge that, and we'll see if I decide to publish this or not. It's the first recording I've made in quite a while, and I've been very under the weather for a couple days, so I'm not sure how sharp I am, but we'll see what happens. If I do publish this, I thank you for those of you who joined me, and I appreciate your support, interest, enthusiasm, and hope that we will continue to learn and grow together. May your way be beautiful and your life be joyful. Bye-bye for now.